My sister encourages her children's criminal behavior. Now, they are destroying the neighborhood, and I called the cops. When I came back from work, I noticed that my shed door was open, and the padlock was broken. Previously, there were many bags full of soda cans in the shed. I drink soda often, so I had collected a lot of cans to take them to the recycling center. But not only were my cans missing, I also found that some gardening tools, a machete, and a gasoline canister were gone. I checked the footage from my security cameras and saw that early in the morning, right after I left for work, my 3 nephews broke into the shed by smashing the lock with a hammer. I called my sister, but she and her husband denied that their kids did it, until I went to their house and showed them the footage. They were furious with their kids for robbing me and skipping school to do it. I got my things back, although the gasoline canister was already empty, and the cans had been taken to the recycling center. I demanded the money they got from the cans, but my nephews had already spent it all on video games and junk food. When I asked how much they earned, it turned out to be nearly $200. I told my sister that she now owed me more than $200 for the cans and the broken lock. At first, my sister and her husband were angry at the kids, but then they started defending them and eventually got mad at me for asking for the money, saying I knew they had 3 kids and a mortgage. I told them they had 2 days to pay me back, or I would go to the police. They told me to leave, so I said I was serious and left. My nephews are thieves, and they've stolen from me before. That's why I installed the cameras in the first place. What they did was unquestionably wrong, but I also know that my sister and her husband won't be able to pay me back. They've been flooding me with messages, calling me heartless for giving them an ultimatum, especially after the holidays when they're strapped for cash. Update: this morning, I went to the police. I tried to negotiate with my sister and her husband over the phone because I didn't want to wait for them to come back from work, but they refused to discuss any way to repay me and even blame me for tempting their kids with easy money by keeping the cans in the shed. That made me furious, and I told them I was done. After that, they started bombarding me with messages again. My oldest nephew even sent me a picture of himself holding a soda can and flipping me off. That was the last straw. I went to the police station and filed a report. I provided them with copies of the footage showing my nephews breaking into the shed, the broken padlock, screenshots of all the messages, and even the photo of my nephew flipping me off. All of this was documented as evidence. I'm not sure if my nephews have been arrested yet, but the police assured me it would happen soon. Maybe community service will change their attitude. I told the police that I was concerned about the fact that my nephews took the machete, but as I suspected, it was classified as a tool, especially since they also took many other tools. They grabbed gardening shears, steel rakes, 2 shovels, one of which was a folding camping shovel, an 8-liter gasoline canister, a cheap electric drill I bought for $5, an electric hedge trimmer, and a small electric chainsaw. They didn't touch the lawnmower trimmer, extension cords, or my old radio. I have no idea why they chose those particular items. I think they plan to sell them. I managed to recover almost everything except the gasoline. I don't know what they did with it. After the break-in, they carried everything they could in their hands, and later returned with some carts that they likely also stole. It took them several trips to remove all the cans, and they didn't even bother to close the door. Now, my nephews are facing charges for trespassing and theft. I'm sure my phone will blow up again with messages when the cops show up for those kids, but I've already made up my mind. I don't care if I get my money back from my sister and her husband. They had their chance. I've already replaced the shed's lock with a much sturdier one, and the machete won't be stored in the shed anymore. I also spoke to some neighbors about what happened, and they said that recently, soda cans have been going missing in the neighborhood. If someone left a bag of cans in plain sight, it would get stolen. I can't say for sure if my nephews were responsible for all of it, but if they were, then they've been doing this for months. I talked to other relatives too, and they're also tired of my sister and her husband. So at least I know they're on my side, which is comforting. I was worried they might turn against me for filing a police report on my nephews, but instead, I heard, "Good job. It's about time those kids face some consequences." It turns out I'm not the only one in the family they've stolen from. Some people suggested I let my nephews work off the $200, but I would never do that. These little ones hate any kind of work, and would just stand around complaining that the whole world is against them. Moreover, they would need constant supervision, which is the last thing I want to deal with. Besides, I banned them from coming to my house for a reason. It all started with stealing food and snacks, and then escalated to DVDs and video games. This led me to start marking my initials on boxes and discs with a permanent marker to prove that my nephews had stolen my belongings. They tried to justify themselves several times by saying, "Oh, you let us take this," but I always caught them lying and made them return the stolen items. Every time, they acted like victims and behaved as if I was being unfair by making them apologize. Those apologies were the most insincere ones I had ever heard. The final straw that made me ban them from my home was when they used a spare key to break in, stole 3 packs of my favorite beer from the fridge, raided my kitchen, and took whatever they liked. One of them even defecated in my toilet without flushing and deliberately urinated on the floor. They tried to deny it, but I knew it was them because the stolen beer was found in their room. My sister and Bill barely punished them, brushing it off with, "Boys will be boys," and then lashed out at me when I said I didn't want to see them or their kids in my house anymore. That's why I installed cameras without telling anyone, which turned out to be a wise decision. My nephews had no idea they were being recorded while robbing my shed. I guess they thought I was an easy target. When I have some spare money, I plan to install even more cameras inside my home. Update 2. My nephews were indeed arrested on Saturday. The police came to their house with a warrant, forcing my sister and Bill to let them in. Apparently, my nephews went from overconfident brats to crying kids as soon as the handcuffs went on. I know this because a neighbor, who's somewhat friendly with my sister, saw everything herself. After the arrest, my sister and Bill started bombarding me with messages again. They couldn't get the kids out of jail until Monday morning, and now the boys are facing charges for theft, intentional property damage, and vandalism. The police took this case seriously because there had been complaints about my nephews for some time, but nothing could be proven until now. For months, bags of cans have been disappearing throughout the neighborhood. I can't say for sure if it was my nephews, but they are likely suspects. The news of their arrest has already spread, and I hope other neighbors with security cameras also provide evidence. My sister and Bill came to my house, but I refused to open the door. I told them this happened because they spoiled their kids and never held them accountable for their actions. They started yelling and banging on my door until I threatened to call the police again, knowing full well I wasn't bluffing. They eventually left, but kept sending me messages. I didn't block them. Instead, I saved all their messages because I decided to file a small claims lawsuit against them. I don't need the money. I've already replaced the broken lock with a much sturdier one. However, it's not just the kids who need to learn a lesson. In the end, I hope I've put them in a tough enough situation that they'll never dare to treat me this way again. My entire family supports me in this. My parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, all of them, stand by me. Many of them were also victims of these kids' thefts. After I banned my nephews from coming to my house, some relatives did the same. I'm insisting that my nephews work off their actions through community service. Not only is it a good idea, but I know they'll hate it. Whenever they're forced to do something they don't want to, they just stand there complaining, acting as if the entire world is against them, and doing almost nothing. Perhaps hundreds of hours of unpaid work will teach them respect and responsibility. Their parents have spoiled them for far too long. Update 3. I thought my sister and Bill would continue being stubborn after everything that happened, but they gave in. I filed a small claims lawsuit against them for their children's actions. In the lawsuit, I demanded $500. This amount included the value of the stolen cans, the broken lock, the purchase of a more reliable and expensive lock to replace it, the lawsuit filing fees, and compensation for emotional distress. Due to all this chaos, my friend's father, who is a lawyer, gave me a free consultation. He said my case was very strong. I had surveillance footage showing my nephews breaking into my shed, as well as videos of my sister and Bill banging on my door, plus all their messages. When my sister and Bill were served court papers, they called me in hysterics. They claimed I couldn't do this to them, but I replied that this was the price they paid for failing to raise their children and letting them become spoiled little thieves. I told them the next time we spoke would either be in court or when they gave me $500, then I hung up. Last night, I was at home with friends, watching a movie and relaxing after work. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I peeked out and saw my sister and Bill. They looked utterly miserable. I opened the door, but left the screen door locked and asked why they had come. They said they were tired of the constant fighting, that everyone was against them, and fully admitted they had seriously messed up by letting things escalate this far. They just wanted to make peace. My friends stood behind me, so there were witnesses to the conversation. Bill handed me an envelope through the gap in the door, containing $500 in $50 bills. He said it was from his personal savings and promised that their children would now face the consequences they deserved. They didn't ask me to drop the charges, but begged me to show leniency. I replied that I was only insisting on community service for my nephews, which was already a very lenient punishment. If we cooperated, the judge would likely agree. They sighed, said they were ready to cooperate, and left without further fuss. My friends congratulated me for standing my ground, and later, other family members did the same. That's when I learned from my parents that they had threatened to cut ties with my sister and Bill unless they started taking responsibility. This pressure forced them to act. After returning the money, my mother visited my sister and Bill. She told me that my nephews were banned from playing video games. All gaming consoles, and even the TV they used for games and movies were taken away. The boys were confined to their rooms, and were reportedly rude and unfriendly, but my sister assured my mother they were working on addressing the issues. Since I got what I wanted, I withdrew the lawsuit. However, my nephews will still face trial for the theft. At long last, they're getting the discipline they should have received years ago. I was also promised that they would never come near my house again. They are only allowed to be at school or at home, and my house is off limits indefinitely. My sister and Bill are now forced to parent their children as they should have from the start. The entire family supports me because my nephews have strained relationships with nearly everyone. Update 4. First, yes, I did install more cameras. One directly above the shed to ensure the entire area is under full surveillance. I'd like to say my sister, Bill, and my nephews learned their lessons from this disaster, but that's not entirely true, especially regarding my eldest nephew. He just couldn't let go of his desire for revenge and eventually attempted something incredibly stupid. Here's what happened. Each of my nephews was sentenced to over 100 hours of community service because their parents had already compensated me, and the judge expedited the process. My nephews were tasked with cleaning up trash and working in several local parks under the supervision of a former military officer. From what I've heard, there wasn't a moment of fun during their service. My eldest nephew constantly resisted and caused scenes whenever he was forced to work. His father had to be called to the park just to get him to pick up a rake. He openly blamed me for everything that happened to him. Initially, his younger brothers supported him, but they eventually realized he was acting like an entitled brat and stopped backing him. The younger nephews finally understood how wrong they had been. However, my sister and Bill blamed me for the family discord, but this didn't help their case. No one in the family supported them. All the responsibility fell on them for their poor parenting, and without anyone to shift the blame to, they became bitter and withdrawn. Half the family no longer wants to interact with them, and their own children are divided into opposing factions because the eldest refuses to behave normally. The situation escalated when my eldest nephew did something so outrageous it's hard to believe. In the middle of the night, he broke into my property armed with 2 of his father's hammers, 1 in each hand. First, he started hammering my new shed lock. Although he didn't break it, he damaged it so badly I had to cut it off with bolt cutters. He also caused significant damage to the shed door, scratching it with the claw side of the hammer. I woke up to the sound of banging, looked out my bedroom window, and saw someone hitting the shed. At first, I didn't realize it was my nephew because his face was covered by a creepy mask. When he noticed the light in my bedroom turning on, he threw one of the hammers directly at my window. Glass shattered everywhere, and I was lucky I didn't cut my feet, as I was barefoot. After that, my nephew began pounding on the back door with the remaining hammer, seriously damaging the handle and window, and leaving deep scratches on the door with the claw side of the hammer. Fearing the door wouldn't hold, I shouted that the police were on their way. Upon hearing this, my nephew fled before they arrived. Surveillance footage confirmed it was him. Although his face was hidden, his school hoodie and Nike sneakers were easily recognizable. His fingerprints were also found on the hammer he threw at my window. Since they had already been fingerprinted after their first arrest, it was easy for the police to match them. When the police came for my eldest nephew, he denied everything. The second hammer was found in his room, along with the clothes and mask he wore. The mask, I was told, was from Star Wars and depicted a character called the Grand Inquisitor. This time, his parents didn't even try to defend him or shift the blame onto me. They just let the police take him, despite his screams and protests. I didn't witness the arrest, but my sister told me that my nephew was running between crying and shouting. One moment, he claimed he was innocent, and the next, he yelled that it was all my fault and that he had to get revenge on me. He was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, and they suspected bipolar disorder. However, this doesn't excuse his actions. Later, when the diagnosis was confirmed and he was prescribed treatment, he began using it as an excuse, acting as if he deserved sympathy just because he was undergoing therapy. Ultimately, he spent a month in a juvenile detention center, where they arranged appropriate treatment for him. He pleaded guilty to avoid a full trial. In exchange, he was assigned additional hours of community service, mandatory counseling sessions with a therapist, and probation. His father personally came to my house to replace the broken window and door. He barely spoke to me during the work, but did everything carefully. The 2 younger nephews now completely avoid their older brother. He still hasn't apologized for attacking my house. Additionally, he's repeating a grade at school due to catastrophically low grades, which has greatly upset his parents. In July, the 2 younger nephews came to me on their own to apologize. They admitted that they had just been following their older brother, but said the punishment they received wasn't worth it. They told me they didn't want to be like that anymore and wanted to have the fun uncle I used to be. I told them we could start fresh, but they'd have to earn back my trust, and they gladly agreed. My eldest nephew turned 17 a few months ago, but he didn't even get a cake as part of his punishment for everything he had done. He had persuaded his brothers to steal from me, destroyed my window and back door, and caused damages that, with legal fees and repairs, exceeded $1,000. Doors and windows aren't cheap. Meanwhile, my youngest nephew celebrated his birthday a month later and got a new mountain bike as a gift. This upset my eldest nephew so much that he punctured the bike's tires with a kitchen knife, landing himself in even more trouble. Since I know a bit about bike repair, I bought new inner tubes and tires, replaced them, and got the bike back in working order. My youngest nephew sincerely thanked me for fixing it. The eldest nephew, however, attempted to run away from home because he wasn't getting any special treatment anymore. He just walked out of the house, got on a bike with a backpack full of belongings, and left. His parents quickly reported him missing because he left behind a farewell letter blaming me and his bipolar disorder for all his problems. In the letter, he wrote that he couldn't wait until he turned 18 to leave us all, so he was doing us a favor by leaving now. 3 days later, he returned home beaten up, without the bike or the backpack. He didn't tell anyone what happened, and we still don't know. However, his father harshly reprimanded him for continuing to use me as a scapegoat for his problems. After returning, my nephew immediately tried to blame me again, but his father wouldn't hear it. I never forced him to steal from me, attack my house, or run away. Those were all his choices. He nearly ended up in juvenile detention again for violating his probation, but somehow he avoided it. Now, he spends his days in his room, except for school, chores, or therapy sessions. He's completed his community service hours, but his probation will last until he turns 18. He's been given some leniency due to his diagnosis, but that hasn't freed him from responsibility. And believe me, he has tried to use it as an excuse many times. Millions of people live with this diagnosis and never do what he did. I'm gradually rebuilding my relationship with the 2 younger nephews, but I want nothing to do with the eldest. It seems the feeling is mutual. Over the past few months, I've only seen him once. He looked at me with such hatred, unlike anything I've ever seen, and then stomped away. With the start of the school year, he's become even more withdrawn. I've been told he barely talks to anyone, even at school. My younger nephews told me that other kids tease him, which, in my opinion, isn't going to help him improve. My sister and Bill aren't on great terms with me either, but they can't blame me for what happened. They know it all stemmed from their poor parenting. Essentially, I forced them to take a more active role in raising their kids, as they should have done from the beginning. They often complain about being tired from work and not having enough time, so every conversation we have is awkward and tense. They don't come to my house, and I don't go to theirs. We only see each other at our parents' place, where our mother insists we behave civilly, which isn't a problem for me. The 2 younger nephews have regained most of their privileges. They're allowed to watch TV and play video games again, but the eldest still isn't. He is now practically an unwelcome guest in the family. Recently, I found out from my parents that they don't even want to see him for Thanksgiving or Christmas this year because they're tired of his behavior and petty theft. I understand their decision, but even I think it's a bit harsh. My sister and Bill agree and are threatening to boycott the holidays if their eldest son isn't allowed to come. I don't want him in my home either, so I understand why my parents made this decision. However, I don't think isolating him from everyone will help him change. He has a long way to go to regain the family's trust, if that's even possible at this point. My eldest nephew might try running away from home again once he's old enough, assuming his previous attempt didn't scare him too much to repeat it. However, I hope things improve for him over time. I may not love him, but he's still my nephew, and I do care about him. Unfortunately, there's very little I can do, other than stay out of it. Update 5. I had hoped to give a more positive update after the holidays, but things didn't improve. It seemed like everything was starting to settle down, but then it all went downhill again. It took some time, but now things are more or less stable. Last year, my sister and Bill went to Bill's parents for Thanksgiving instead of mine. My eldest nephew didn't behave particularly well there either, but at least he didn't cause any major trouble, or so they told everyone. My sister and Bill also had long conversations with our parents about how isolating my nephew wasn't helping his mental health. I supported them on this because it was clear that all he felt was hatred, and nothing productive was coming from it. In the end, my parents relented and allowed him to attend the family Christmas celebration. Of course, I bought him a gift to try to help with his mental state. In early December, I went to a local thrift store and found a used mountain bike. It needed some minor repairs, but for $30, it was a great deal. I also learned that after his runaway attempt, his good backpack was stolen, and he'd been using an old one that had belonged to one of his brothers. So, I also bought a second-hand backpack at the same store for $5. I repaired the bike and cleaned the backpack. When I gave him the gifts one Sunday, he looked completely stunned that I had gotten him anything at all. He accepted them with gratitude and immediately started using them. My sister and Bill were equally shocked that I had replaced items he lost after attacking my house. However, the gifts had the desired effect. I stopped being the object of his hatred. He had been looking for any excuse to portray me as the villain who ruined his life, but I wasn't that person. The next time I saw him was at the family Christmas party. There, my sister and Bill made him apologize to me for everything. They literally stood over him while he spoke, repeatedly making him look me in the eye. In his apology, he admitted that his arrest wasn't my fault, that he had provoked me, stolen from me, and damaged my property. He promised it wouldn't happen again. We shook hands, and he didn't cause any scenes at the party. However, his parents practically hovered over him all evening, keeping him on a tight leash. It was awkward, but I understood why they did it. They had worked hard to get permission for him to attend Christmas. Things took a turn for the worse on New Year's Eve. My eldest nephew stole a bottle of champagne from his parents and drank it alone in the bathroom before anyone could stop him. Earlier, he had asked if he could try alcohol, but they told him he was too young. So he stole a bottle. As it turns out, he'd been secretly stealing alcohol long before his first arrest. He had a hidden stash that he'd been using regularly. This time, he wasn't punished too harshly. He was just sent to his room for the night. He explained that he had stolen the alcohol because he really wanted a drink, and it was New Year's Eve. When his brothers were asked where they got alcohol, they admitted they'd been following his example. They showed their parents the stash, which included cans of beer and bottles of liquor, some of which had been secretly refilled after small amounts were taken. The most shocking revelation was that they had also been sneaking into other people's houses in the neighborhood to steal alcohol. Their method was simple. They looked for unlocked doors or windows and avoided homes with dogs because of the barking. They didn't take anything large or valuable, so they could return without raising suspicion. After their arrest last year, they realized that being thieves wasn't as fun as they thought. Naturally, they were punished for not admitting this earlier. Despite their efforts to keep it secret, rumors spread anyway, confirming suspicions some neighbors had. Given how sneaky my nephews had been, you'd think they would have been more cautious about cameras. Or maybe they just assumed that old Uncle Me wouldn't install any. After they were caught, several neighbors, including those near my sister's house, also installed cameras. The punishment for these confessions wasn't severe. Bill now stores all alcohol in a padlocked fridge in the garage. But this wasn't the worst of it. In February, my eldest nephew got into a fight at school. I was told he didn't start it. Another boy provoked him until they both started swinging. It was later revealed that my nephew had been a bully at school long before his arrest. He targeted smaller and weaker kids, stole their things, and slashed bike tires with a knife. The fight occurred because the older brother of one of his victims sought revenge. My nephew had both of his front teeth knocked out and his nose broken. He had to be taken to the hospital, where a maxillofacial surgeon reinserted his teeth and fixed his nose. He also had to wear a neck brace for a while. The boy who attacked him received only a 2-week suspension. This upset me, but I also understood. It happened because my nephew had been a bully, and karma came back around. Now it's summer, and my eldest nephew spends most of his time in his room. He occasionally goes out for a bike ride, but otherwise, he stays isolated. My sister and Bill are considering moving closer to Bill's parents once their son's probation ends, which I completely understand. The entire neighborhood despises them, and they want to leave as soon as they can afford it. Unfortunately, that could take a year or more. In the meantime, I've been spending more time with my 2 younger nephews. They've changed significantly. They're respectful and visit me regularly. Nothing goes missing, and I enjoy spending time with them, watching movies, and playing games. They've become good kids again, and are sincerely trying to make up for their past mistakes. As for my eldest nephew, I rarely see him. However, he no longer acts coldly toward me. Once, he even brought me his bike to repair. He was quiet and stoic, but it felt like a step forward. I know that once he turns 18, he'll want to leave and go as far away as possible. We've suggested he consider vocational school, and he seems open to the idea. What are your thoughts on this story? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments. It'll be interesting to read them. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot to me. Take care.